They are identified early, categorized, feeble-minded, imbecile, idiot.
It would have been better by far if they had never been born.
First they shot me with some kind of medicine. Supposed to dead my nerve. Then the next thing I heard was snip, snip, and that was it.
Did they tell you what they were doing to you?
No.
They didn't have to tell him. He knew. A sterilization by force.
In the 1920s, intelligence quotients were used to identify the lowest members of society who were considered a detriment to America's gene pool and were subject to involuntary sterilization or institutionalization. 4 Iowa scientists challenged the belief that IQ was inherited and static by studying Iowa children. While the Iowans were treated undiplomatically in debates by eugenicists of the time, their unprecedented results pushed psychology into its modern age.
Since its inception in 1910, scientists at the Eugenics Records Office in New York falsely claimed certain traits were strictly inherited and advocated for the sterilization of all those who were maintained wholly or in part by public expense, feeble-minded, insane, criminalistics, epileptic, inebriate, diseased, blind, deaf, deformed, and dependent, orphans, ne'er-do-wells, tramps, the homeless, and paupers.
States adopted mandatory sterilization laws that unfairly targeted people of color and people in poverty. In 1927, Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. infamously declared, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough," striking down a constitutional challenge to eugenics laws and establishing a national precedent resulting in the eventual sterilization of 60,000 people.
Lewis Terman, a Stanford University professor and a strong proponent of eugenics, fixated on the heredity of intelligence. He altered Alfred Binet's original IQ test to produce numbers that outlined different levels of mental deficiency, labeling the categories imbeciles, morons, and idiots. Terman's tests were used to identify those who were considered permanently feeble-minded to then sterilize or place them in institutions.
At the Iowa Child Welfare Research Station in Iowa City, Iowa, the current director, George Stoddard, disagreed with the mainstream belief that IQ was unchangeable. In 1932, Beth Wellman, a psychologist at the station, explored further doubts of IQ constancy by testing the IQs of children. She found that children who attended preschool experienced increases in their IQs. Her unexpected results set the stage for the next 2 decades of research at the station.
Harold Skeels and Mary Skodak, both psychologists at the Iowa station, were hired to test the IQs of children at the Iowa Soldiers' Orphans Home in Davenport, Iowa. In 1933, at the height of the Great Depression, hygiene and housing standards fell significantly at the home. Lack of stimulation caused the children's cognitive abilities to decline. The home faced a damaging lawsuit when a couple claimed the child they adopted from the home was mentally deficient. Consequently, the home reformed adoptions into a 2-step process. To be adopted, children first had to test within the normal IQ range. After being placed into adoptive homes, psychologists followed up 2 years later with another test to ensure the children were still in the normal IQ range.
In 1935, Skeels and Skodak began Part 2 of the adoption process, visiting families to ensure their children were still considered adoptable. Upon analyzing the results, children had not sunk to the low IQs of their biological parents, but were constantly scoring in the above-average range. After all IQ tests were administered, the average score is 116, falling into the superior range. Skeels made his first revelation noting, "The limits within which modifiability is possible are much greater than we had assumed."
Later, Skeels and Skodak were asked to perform IQ tests on children in state institutions. Here, Skeels was reunited with 2 girls he had tested at the Davenport home years earlier. Once depressed infants who had to be moved to an institution, the girls were now bright, cheerful, and intelligent. Their IQs had doubled and were nearing the normal range. Their experiences at the institution, games, music, crafts, and field trips, had caused IQ changes never reported before. Skeels was on the verge of a discovery, that IQ is affected by the environment.
George Stoddard supported Skeel's work and encouraged him to begin the most dissenting study yet. He got permission to place 11 children with low intelligence from Davenport in the Institution for Feeble-Minded Children at Glenwood to be cared for by low-intelligence women. 11 children who remained at Davenport were used as a control group. At Glenwood, the children heard stories, used art supplies, sang songs, played games, and even used playground equipment. These things were foreign at Davenport. When tested a year later, the children who were moved to a more stimulating environment gained on an average 27 IQ points, while those that remained at Davenport lost 26 points.
After numerous studies suggesting environment was a more important factor in IQ than heredity, the Iowa scientists announced their findings at the meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 1937. These studies challenged the principles that upheld eugenics and were seen as a threat by Lewis Terman, the developer of the IQ test, as well as other eugenicists. Alfred Wiggum, a renowned eugenics expert, was asked to write a counter-argument to the Iowan's papers. Terman wrote to Wiggum, threatening, "I can assure you now most emphatically that if your report to the Ladies' Home Journal has to be satisfactory to the Iowa people, it will be a poor job of reporting."
On numerous occasions, Terman attacked the Iowans, stating, "I'm amazed at the propaganda from the Child Research Institute at Iowa. Their preposterous contributions are not backed up by data at all convincing." In another case, Terman invited George Stoddard to debate him at a meeting of educators and psychologists, but deliberately omitted Stoddard's name from the program. Later, Terman organized a second public debate with Stoddard, giving himself an hour to speak and Stoddard just 10 minutes.
In 1940, George Stoddard was invited to lead a meeting of the National Society for the Study of Education. He resolved to let both sides of the debate equally present their points at the meeting. However, in a cunning move, Lewis Terman blocked the input of eugenicist Quinn McNamara, convincing him to wait to publish his denunciation until after the meeting was over, so Stoddard and the other Iowa scientists would not have a means to refute it. When McNamara's paper was published, despite its deliberate omissions and outright errors, the damage was done, and the Iowans' work faded from view as World War II began.
After World War II, studies began to emerge with similar results to the Iowans, and scientists began to reconsider their work. In 1961, psychologist Joseph McVicker Hunt wrote an analysis of the Iowans' work that caught the attention of President Lyndon B. Johnson, who launched Head Start. Hunt's analysis remarked, "The work was picked to pieces by critics and lost much of the suggestive value it was justified in having. Many of you will recall the ridicule that was heaped upon the idea of feeble-minded infants being brought to normal mentality by moron nursemaids. That just such a use of preschool experience is now being seriously planned by sensible people with widespread approval means that something has changed." As psychologists turned their backs on the static IQ, studies focused on creating better environments for children rather than how IQ is passed genetically. This represented a fundamental shift in the way psychology viewed child development. Today, it is well understood that children need cognitive stimulation in early childhood in order to be successful.
Though the Iowans were unable to debate their findings diplomatically and virtually disappeared when World War II began, their work was the first of its kind, establishing the effects environment can have on children's IQs and toppling the belief, deeply rooted in eugenics, that IQ is constant. Post-World War II, their work led other psychologists to realize this about child development and led to the creation of early education programs across the country and movement away from belief in the fixed IQ. Their results were essential to moving child psychology forward and into its modern age.